Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Ian, and today we're jumping into Canada's free trade era. In the 1980s, Canada was really reeling from a brutal recession. Factories were shutting down and folks were whispering about becoming America's backyard, maybe even the 51st state. But out of that pressure came a bold pivot towards openness, one that rewired our economy and even laid the groundwork for the industrial spaces we see booming across the country today. Let's take a moment to unpack how we went from protectionist walls to handshake deals that really changed everything. To set the stage here, rewind to Canada's economic playbook after World War II. For decades, we leaned hard into protectionism. High tariffs shielded our industries. Think auto manufacturing in Ontario or textiles in the Maritimes, really saving us from cheaper foreign imports. It was a really nice setup that we had, rooted in the national policy of the late 1800s, designed to build a self-reliant nation. But by the 1970s and into the 80s, cracks were really starting to show. Global trends were shifting. Europe was knitting together the common market. Japan was flooding markets with efficient exports. And even in the US, our biggest trading partner, was eyeing barriers to protect its own jobs under Reagan. Canada exported about 70% of its goods south of the border, but threats of US tariffs, like on softwood lumber or energy, had everyone on edge. Then we got hit by the 1980s recession, a double whammy that really lit the fuse. Inflation was raging in the early part of the decade. Interest rates spiked over 20% to tame it, and unemployment climbed to 12% by 1983. Our national debt ballooned, and provinces were slashing budgets. Manufacturers took a beating. Over 300,000 jobs vanished in Ontario alone. Businesses clamored for action. Why fight tariffs when we could negotiate them away? The McDonald Commission, a big federal review wrapping up in 1985, dropped bombshell recommendations. Pursue free trade with the US to boost productivity and jobs. It wasn't just talk. Global winds were blowing towards liberalization, with GATT rounds pushing down barriers worldwide. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, fresh off his 1984 landslide win, saw this as his legacy play. A Charlottetown boy who knew the sting of economic hardship, he pitched it as survival. Integrate or get left behind. Negotiations for all this kicked off fast in May 1986, with Canadian teams led by Simon Reisman, a tough-as-nails ex-deputy minister, and US counterparts under Clayton Uter. It was high-stakes poker. Canada wanted safeguards for cultural industries like broadcasting and supply management and dairy, while the US was pushing for open energy markets and fewer subsidies. Talks dragged through summer into fall, with midnight sessions in Washington and Ottawa. By October 3rd, 1987, they had a deal. The Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, or CUS-FTA. Mulroney and Reagan signed it January 2nd, 1988 in Palm Springs. Tariffs on most goods would phase out over 10 years, covering billions in trade, from cars to wheat. It entered force January 1st, 1989, promising to double our exports to the US and create 500,000 jobs. But oh boy, the politics exploded. The 1988 federal election became the free trade election, a slugfest that defined Mulroney's era. Liberals under John Turner hammered him as selling out sovereignty. "You've sold us out," Turner thundered in one debate, accusing Mulroney of turning Canada into the 51st state without a vote. NDP's Ed Broadbent warned of branch plant factories draining our tech edge. Mulroney fired back. "This isn't surrender, it's strength. Access to a $6 trillion market to fuel growth." Ads flew. Pro-trade spots showed farming thriving. Anti-ones depicted American eagles gobbling Canada maple leaves. Polls swung wildly. Early 1988 had support around 35%, dipping as fears of job losses peaked. Cross-country surveys from Environics captured the divide. Urban centers like Toronto worried about manufacturing wipeouts, while rural Alberta cheered export booms. Women and younger voters leaned skeptical, fearing cultural erosion. On November 21st, 1988, Mulroney's Progressive Conservatives scraped a second majority with 43% of the vote, flipping 19 seats on trade alone. It was a razor-thin mandate, but enough to ratify the deal. And the public reactions from this? Well, a cocktail of hope and dread. Economists projected 1 to 2% annual GDP bumps, more secure supply chains, and investment inflows. Fears loom large though. Unions rallied 250,000 in Toronto against Buy American spillover. Polls post-election showed a 48% approval, but it came with some swings in different provinces. Over time, as trade tripled to $1.5 billion daily by the mid-1990s, opinions started to flip. By 2000, 70% saw it as a big win. Now, these trade agreements were just the opener. Enter Mexico in 1990, eyeing our blueprint amid its own reforms under Salinas. Trilateral talks heated up, wrapping with the North America Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Signed December 17, 1992 by Mulroney, Bush, and Salinas. It kicked in January 1st, 1994, folding CUSFTA, adding Mexico's 80 million consumers. Side deals tackled labor and environment to quiet critics. Trade exploded. Canada exports to the bloc hit $500 billion by 2000, with auto parts zipping seamlessly across borders. Now, let's tie this to real estate really quickly, because that's where history meets your next investment. Free trade didn't just move goods, it moved money and built bones for the economy. Cross-border investment surged. US firms poured billions into Canadian plants, tripling FDI since 1993. That meant demand for industrial space. Think sprawling warehouses in Windsor's export zones or rail-served facilities in Calgary. Governments fast-tracked infrastructure. The Windsor-Detroit Tunnel expanded. Highway 401 got upgrades for traffic, and CN Rail electrified lines to handle the load. In BC, Vancouver ports boomed with NAFTA containers, sparking logistics parks. Even the residential area felt ripple effects. Affordable housing near these hubs drew in workers. So, what does this mean looking back? The free trade era yanked Canada from isolation's grip into globalization flow, driven by recession fires and visionary bets. It sparked debates that still simmer in elections, from Meech Lake to modern supply chain woes and everything going on with the US and tariffs. Promises of prosperity mostly panned out. Our economy grew 3% annually through the 90s. But fears of inequality linger, fueling today's fair trade pushes. As we navigate the USMCA tweaks and global tensions, remember, these pacts aren't just paper, they're the blueprints for the land we build on. Now, looking at how these free trade agreements between the US, Mexico, and global trade have really shaped Canada into a global player, how do you think these new issues with tariffs in the US and really getting back to the built in Canada, made in Canada, buy in Canada is going to affect our economy? Do you think it's going to boost us and help the small guys, the small businesses get more sales and sell more local? Or do you think it's going to hurt consumers because now we have to buy Canadian, we have a hard time getting stuff from other countries, and we're spending more on that? I'd love to know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Like and share if you learned something, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.